And I think that the term shadow healing has been thrown around a lot, but of course shadow healing is important, but I like to talk more about shadow integration because I think that that is the perspective that we should walk into confronting our shadows and all the shit that comes with that. Hey everyone, was this recording? It is. Thank God. Hey everyone, what is up? It's your girl Jasmine Kylene. I am a spiritual counselor, conscious media journalist, and a human being having a good time. I hope you are well, or as well as you possibly can be, given the circumstances of existing. That Bantu knot has given up on me, but you know, same. Right? If the lighting seems a little bit weird, it is because I am filming this video during the nighttime, which is different than what I usually do, but it's because I felt called to do or have this talk on this certain subject during the nighttime because I feel it's when I'm the most comfortable with my shadow self, which is what we're going to be talking about today. You guys really loved the video that I did on like the easiest tips that I use for inner child healing, which I want to immediately say that in the beginning of that video, or at some point in that video, I talked about how those tips were not to be replaced with actual therapy and actually seeing a mental health professional. But me coming from a spiritual counselor standpoint, I do know the things that you can do to implement in your day-to-day in order to heal your inner child, or what we're going to be talking about today, which is shadow integration. So the same thing goes for this, right? Nothing that I say in here is going to replace the actual act of going to a therapist or like actually embarking in your therapy journey, and I would highly encourage that. I think that everybody could benefit from having a therapist or going to therapy, even if you don't think that you need it. Thinking that you don't need therapy is like the #1 sign that you need therapy. But that's, you know, that's tea. Here are some of the ways that I have successfully, I think, integrated my shadow self, and the reason why I was inspired to do this video is because January and February, if you're watching this, you know, obviously, you know, this video can like last the test of time, so you could be watching this at any point, but if you're watching this around the time I've uploaded it, January and February of 2021 are, I think, a bit mentally tumultuous, mentally chaotic to say the least. There's a lot of Uranus and Pluto action going on, a lot of squares, so we could be really stuck in our heads, and that can sometimes sort of irritate our shadow selves and bring them to the surface. So it's important that we know how to deal with that energy when it arises. And I think that the term shadow healing has been thrown around a lot, but of course shadow healing is important, but I like to talk more about shadow integration because I think that that is the perspective that we should walk into confronting our shadows and all the shit that comes with that. So these are just some tips and tricks and the ways in which I've navigated shadow healing. And the very first thing that I want to say, aside from literally just go to therapy, is okay, this may sound a little controversial, but hear me out, stick with me. The very first thing that I would say is to stop chasing happiness. Stop it. Just stop. So the reason why I feel this way is because as human beings, we are equipped to feel a spectrum of emotion, and on that spectrum, happiness may lie on one side and sadness may lie on the other side, but what makes those two emotions polar is that they are extremes, right? So while we of course wouldn't strive to reach the extreme of sadness, I don't know why it suddenly is okay to strive for the other extreme, which is happiness, because that in itself makes us vilify all of the other emotions that we are meant to feel, that we gain something from feeling, and that just don't simply lie under the happiness umbrella. So when we approach life not chasing happiness, but rather approaching it as wanting to maintain a neutral peace, which, you know, can really just be categorized as allowing whatever emotion you feel to be felt and to move through you and to leave something behind, because everything that we feel and everything that we experience adds to the molding of self, the molding of our soul, the molding of our experience, perception of reality. And so when we allow that to just kind of be a constant wave, right? Because everything is changing and everything is malleable, and so is our emotion. And so how we experience our emotion is directly derivative of how we perceive that emotion. And so if we think that like happiness is all we need to feel, whenever we do come in contact with our shadow selves, which obviously can tend to evoke feelings of disdain or grief or sadness or anxiety or whatever the case may be, we can get very upset at ourselves because we're not in this vibrational alignment and we're not feeling the way that we're supposed to be feeling because we're chasing this like abstract concept of happiness. When in turn, if we just allow ourselves to not be upset at ourselves for feeling the way we're meant to feel as humans, I mean, what a gift it is to be alive and what a gift it is to feel. I think if we had the privilege of feeling taken away from us, we would miss it a lot. We would miss sadness. Because it adds depth to the experience of living. So what I would immediately say is to instead approach life striving for neutral peace instead of happiness. And when you strive for neutral peace, you don't get upset at yourself when your shadow arises, right? Because you are just sort of observing the emotion the way you would every other emotion, and not attaching or identifying with that emotion or any emotion, but rather just observing it the way you would anything. And before I actually get to like the work of it, like what does it mean to actually like physically integrate your shadow, the second thing I would say is to first and foremost not vilify your shadow. The same way that I just said we shouldn't vilify emotion. I think that, you know, I am currently mapping out a course talking about healing our 4 inner layers, but you probably, if you've watched my videos before, you've heard me mention that we have, or rather how my perspective of it is that we operate with 4 layers, right? So we have our higher selves, we have our shadow selves, we have our inner children, and we have our sexual or sensual selves. No side can exist without the other, right? Everything to some extent is dual, right? So you cannot have your higher self without somehow having your shadow self, right? You can't have your inner child without having your evolved, adult, sexually expressive human. So I say that to say that if you ever want to embody your higher self, you have to accept the fact that your shadow self is going to have to exist somewhere within you. Your shadow self is not going anywhere. So if you spend so much time expelling energy by fighting your shadow self, by being upset when you fall into lapse of depression, or when you think, you know, with a poor inner dialogue, or whatever your shadow self evokes within you, know that that is meant to exist within you and alongside every other part of you. And if you ever, oh gosh, I believe it's psychosynthesis. I studied this when I was doing my spiritual counseling certification. I believe it's called psychosynthesis. I believe the study is psychosynthesis, but it's a concept under that is this idea that we have so many sub-personalities that we identify with, and that's when we start to suffer, right? When we identify with the part of us that is expressive and creative, then we get mad at the part of us that is not that, or that it is shy, instead allowing yourself to just kind of be the self that is outside of all that, and just observing your sub-personalities as parts of you. You know, not allowing any of them to have the steering wheel, but rather just kind of be passengers while you drive the vehicle that is your physical vessel. And I apologize if I'm getting like a little too philosophical. And I apologize if that statement in itself was cringy, because I'm not actually getting really that philosophical, but I apologize if any of this is convoluted. What I mean to say is that, you know, your shadow self is no better or no worse than any other part of you. You shouldn't identify with any part of you. You shouldn't even identify with your higher self, because that's going to set you up to have an unrealistic standard of what being a human is like, right? It's one thing to, you know, kind of step outside of yourself and consult the different layers of yourself, right? So if you're making this big decision, if you're wondering what you want to do with your career, if you want to move somewhere, consulting, you know, your higher self, you know, what is in the best interest of me on a physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental level? Yes, absolutely. If you are drained a bit and you are exhausted by work or just by life, consulting your inner child and like, okay, how can I play right now? How can I decompress? You know, consulting the different layers of you in different parts of your lives and in different, you know, timelines. Yes, absolutely. But you shouldn't be led solely by one, because that will lead you to vilify parts of you that are authentic and genuine and valid in being part of you, right? So your shadow self, you should absolutely not vilify. You should accept. I think immediately the first step into shadow integration is accepting the fact that your shadow is always going to be part of you. There's never this like, I made it. I'm never going to feel anything outside of what is perfect and amazing and divine. Like, you're always going to have this part of you, and that isn't like a, you know, I'm a very optimistic person, so that isn't this like sobering wake-up call. It's exciting because that in itself gives you depth. How else would you be able to relate to humanity, to the people that you help and serve, to the friends and family that you console? How else would you be able to navigate this world that is so dense and that is so filled with, experience and connection, how would you be able to operate in that world if you don't know what it feels like to be on that end of it? If you don't know what it feels like to suffer, how can you be a healer? And whatever healing looks like for you, how can you be an artist? How can you be expressive if you don't understand what it means to have a shadow self, to feel the deeper emotions that we vilify as bad when really serve us? They really serve us. So allow your, oh, this is gone. Isn't this gone? That's fine. So allow your shadow self to be part of you. That would be the main first step, I would say. Secondly would be to understand what your shadow self is feeling. I feel like whenever our shadow selves, and obviously this is an individual experience, so you know what it's like when your shadow self has kind of like taken the wheel, but obviously that shows up in different ways, but you know what it feels like. And so what I would say, something that really helps me is whenever I feel like I'm in a space where, okay, my shadow self is like really talking, I'm really feeling heavy, I'm feeling pulled down, I'm feeling like there's kind of like this blaring, like, okay, what's up, sis? What I do is I kind of sit down and I free write. I write a letter from the perspective of my shadow self, and I let everything go. I let absolutely everything go. I'm like, okay, what do you have to say? What are you hurting about? What's going on? And I don't think about it. I just allow myself to free write fully. And you'll honestly be so fucking surprised at what you see on your page when you're done, because you go into some sort of like autopilot mode. The same way that I always say, you know, scripting is a great way to manifest, because you're sort of writing from the space of your higher self that, you know, isn't bound by fear. When you are intentional with writing from the perspective of your shadow self, it's the same thing. It's kind of like brain spotting, if you ever have done any like trauma related therapy, but you just kind of like flow out, and everything that this dark and hurt part of you is feeling is going to come out on paper. And I would give some time in between. You know, sometimes I'll do it at nighttime, then the next morning I'll kind of read it and I respond to whatever was written from the perspective of like the self outside of it. Which, once again, I apologize if that sounds convoluted, but it's more so just like reading what your shadow self has to say and responding to it from a loving and validating place that you would if that shadow self was your best friend. And I think first and foremost, saying it's okay. Telling your shadow self it's okay to feel hurt and to feel, you know, betrayed or whatever, or wounded or whatever it is. Validating that, saying that you're sorry for stifling them, right? You're sorry for not allowing them the room to speak. And then addressing whatever was brought up, saying, you know, I understand why you feel like you're not good enough, but you are, and here's why. Or, you know, I understand that that happened and that upset you and you are valid in feeling that way, but here's why that shouldn't matter. Or like, here's, you know what I'm saying? You know how to take care of you. We are always our own best counsel when we come from a space of non-judgment, no fear, and just kind of like allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with ourselves. I think we hide a lot from ourselves often because we like to control perception, and we can control external perception if we're controlling internal perception, which is T. But sort of allowing yourself to console yourself, and really when you have on paper what it is that your shadow self is saying, the next step, which is to address things from the root, becomes so much easier, right? So obviously, if you dealt with rejection in your early childhood, that part of you, that hurt, is going to be there, and that's okay, because that's how you're going to step into the role of someone who is accepting and loving of others, right? You can allow that to be your superpower, to be your Chiron, the wounded healer. You can allow that to fuel how you show up beautifully. But at the same time, you know, if the heaviness that your shadow self carries, if that stems from anything trauma related or anything, you know, from your past, any experiences, any people, any former relationships, allowing yourself to see that on paper and address it from the root can be a way where you can begin to mend a little bit, right? Because you do want to evolve and you do want to be in a healthier space. Sorry, I just got a notification that Lady Gaga is performing at the inauguration. Go off, queen. But you want to make sure that you're adjusting things from the root. So, you know, if your shadow self is saying, I'm so upset at the fact that I was left in this relationship, well, you can dig a bit deeper and say, okay, well, why do you feel validated by external acceptance? How does that connect to my relationship with one of my parents? Or, you know, how does that immediately affect how I see myself? Really getting to the roots of what your shadow self is trying to say, and then working from that up, right? So mending whatever the root cause of it is, and then changing and shifting your perspective on what that entailed and and kind of coming back to you, right? Having a different perspective, because at the end of the day, our shadow selves aren't just like bad energies that are mad and want to ruin things. They often stem from trauma, they often stem from hurt. So instead of being like, go away, bad emotion, I don't want you, addressing it, hugging it, accepting it, and integrating it, right? And this can also, aside from trauma, right, this also can be, for instance, I am a very spiritual being, right? And for a while, I thought that because I was and I guess in the beginning of my spiritual journey, a long, long time ago, I thought that I had to stop, listening to, really misogynistic music, or watching all of the scary movies that I loved so much, but I knew that they weren't, of the highest possible vibration for my, sacred vessel. And then, with time, and this also went for drinking alcohol or even smoking weed, and then with time, I realized that there is balance and that there is integration. The Trump supporters are at it again. With time, I realized that there was balance and there was integration, and then I started to allow myself to enjoy the things that I wanted to enjoy, that I felt like my shadow self loved a bit more, at the forefront, and allowing her time to have entertainment, allowing her the time to enjoy. So, I can all morning lead and facilitate meditations and healings and do readings and sessions, but at nighttime, I can put on my black, I can be in my room, I can put on a nice vibe and watch The Haunting of Hill House, and that's me kind of giving my shadow self the space to marinate, right? And that isn't to say that those things only are connected to our shadows, but rather whatever you deem as what is occult about you, what is out of the norm about you, whether you present yourself as some way, but just allowing there to be a mending, allowing yourself to be a blend of all of your layers, allowing the darkness to seep a little bit out, allowing that plutonic, scorpionic energy, and obviously knowing your astrology also helps, because if you have a lot of 8th house or even 12th house, but mainly 8th house, if you have a lot of energy or planets or concentration there, it would actually be important for you to integrate your shadow self a bit more to the forefront, because then you can sort of rest in knowing that you don't have to hide all of the tornado shit that's going on in your head. And lastly, take time to process. Allow yourself to go to hermit mode. I think that obviously with the pandemic, we've been allowed a lot of time to sort of relish in isolation, but outside of that, if you are doing some shadow work and a lot of shit is coming up for you, allow yourself space and time in between your doses of shadow work to, just allow yourself to not have to do it all at once. It's okay. We have a fucking lifetime. And spoiler alert, at the end of the journey, there is no end. You're always going to be integrating. You're always going to be evolving. You're always going to be changing and experiencing. So allowing yourself the space to put whatever you're healing into a container and live your life is good. And take the time to process. If you really are going through shadow integration or shadow work and you're being faced with and mirrored with a lot of your shit, don't feel the need to be social, don't feel the need to continue. Allow yourself the time to process and kind of sit with whatever you're facing, if you don't feel like you can really immediately jump back into life and what you know life to be. So yeah, in summation, go to therapy, stop striving for happiness and allow yourself to just embrace all the emotions that come with existing. Write a letter from the perspective of your shadow self. Allow your shadow self time to talk, time to explain, time to have the floor instead of being stifled. Accept the fact that your shadow self will always be part of you and will gift you with the ability to relate and to connect to other humans, and that in itself is a gift. And allow yourself time to process, address things from the root, and when things get addressed, know that it can get heavy. So if you need time off, take the time off. If you need it to do it in doses, do it in doses. But yeah, I will also link some resources on actual shadow work techniques, but I wanted to focus a bit more on shadow integration, allowing ourselves to just be okay with being multifaceted, allowing ourselves to be okay knowing that we are still divine and the cosmos embodied, even when we feel like we are face to face with our shadow selves, because our shadow selves are just parts of us in this human experience. So you're fine, you're okay. If you ever want any help or you want to take a session with me, I obviously do this kind of stuff, so you can reach out. But otherwise, I'm sending you all my love, and hope that this served you and resonated to any capacity. I am going to eat some treats and have myself a good night, but feel free to subscribe or visit lalyaluna.tv for more conscious content, or follow me on Instagram. And otherwise, yeah, have a good one.